Has China surrendered in the trade war? If China surrendered in the trade war, it would be a tactical move. They are going to overtake the US economy anyway, and from the Chinese perspective, the US might as well help them to do that. All Trump wants is to be able to say he beat China, and then it's business as usual. If China wanted to, they could give him that. It's unlikely that they will, but they could. Why, you might ask? Well, because the existence of Trump or America for that matter is almost inconsequential for China. Sure, it would help China a lot to have a good trade relationship with the US, but not having a trade relationship with the US might actually do more harm to the US than to China. Without China, the US market is basically the developed world, which already finds it difficult to resist the high growth rates China offers. China might be exactly as evil as the US media makes them out to be, but they're developing awesome technology and make tons of money for their investors. So the US might hold on to their high-end market for a while, but in the long run they will have a hard time competing against lower cost and higher value. On the Chinese side, China is playing a different game. They are developing their own market through the Belt and Road Initiative. They're thinking outside the box. They're basically helping developing countries to build infrastructure, moving their factories to these countries, creating jobs, and therefore growing their own international consumer market. In other words, they are literally creating the customers they need to buy their stuff. The US, on the other hand, chose to bomb or bully these developing countries or overthrew their governments, which caused poverty in these countries. In other words, while China saw the potential of an emerging consumer market in these countries, the US and their allies saw these nations as backward non-white countries that could be invaded, exploited or pushed around. In fact, Trump literally called this developing market, shithole countries, which was of course considered to be rude by most Americans, but rather because of his choice of words than their conviction that he was wrong. In fact, most Americans think Africa as a whole is a single country with flies crawling over everything that moves, because that's how their media portrays the continent. So do Americans see developing nations as a potential market? No. And it is exactly for this reason that the US is not very popular in developing countries, countries that in fact show extremely high GDP growth rates. The problem the US has now is that it's too late to turn around. For decades, the US used the business model of marauders. It worked well enough back then, but it's a primitive approach and has become outdated. Our cultures have evolved and we don't want to deal that way anymore. Let's face it. The US never had any intention to really help developing countries to grow their economies. The US only ever thought of growing their own economy. It worked for a very long time because their major and most important international market was made up of already developed countries in Europe. So the US was kind of a mall for rich people, with Americans just being happy to be rubbing shoulders with the la-di-da crowd in Europe like the Great Gatsby. But now the growth rates of these developed countries are slowing down. The populations in these countries are also growing at a slower rate. On the other hand, most developing countries have higher growth rates. Their populations are also growing. More people mean more consumers. But they don't have money. Poor people can't buy iPhones. So what do? Make them rich, says China. Then they become consumers. Bomb them or bully them and take their stuff, says the US. That's how I see this playing out internationally. But what do things look like domestically if the US manages to completely isolate China and also manages to isolate itself, which is the direction Trump seems to be taking with his protectionist policies? Well, China has about 1.4 billion people. That's about 1.4 billion domestic consumers. The US, on the other hand, has about 330 million people, which gives them 330 million domestic consumers.